Yeah. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the GNRC Transportation Policy Board. I am sitting in the chair usually set in by Mayor Callis, who is traveling. It's been a long time since I've had access to a gavel, and I do aim to use it a lot today. Welcome, everybody. I know that GNRC staff have identified that we do have a quorum for today's meeting. We do have several action items. The first of those is you have in your packets the minutes of the March 19th, 2025 meeting, and I would accept a motion to approve those minutes if everyone has had a chance to review those.
We will approve minutes.
Got a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion or anything that needs correction? Hearing no sign of discussion, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Very good. We have our minutes approved. Now on the agenda, we've got public comment. At this time, I'll open the floor to any member of the public who wishes to make a comment to the Transportation Policy Board. Do we have anyone wishing to address the board? Being no indications of interest in public comment, we will move on to the agenda. First up are our action items. Item 3A is amending the Transportation Improvement Program, and I will welcome Taylor Lee, the GNRC Project Delivery Coordinator, to present proposed amendments to FY 2023 to 26 Transportation Improvement Program.
Thank you, Mayor Connell. Appreciate that. So today we have 9 amendments to present to the board for review and hopeful approval. What to note, just give a background we do every time we have our tips. It's a short range 4-year program that covers all the regionally significant federally funded transportation projects in our MPO area. They must be consistent with our RTP, which we're also in the midst of updating right now. They have to be fiscally constrained. And just as kind of a snapshot, we're approximately $2.3 billion right now in our 4-year plan through fiscal year 26. So our proposed tip amendments today, we have 9. We'll start off with 2 that are kind of tied together for the city of Portland. First one we have is Amendment 22. This is creating a new project. This is Kirby Road and South Russell Street resurfacing the city of Portland. This is drawing off and shifting funds, from their 3R grouping page of just under 600,000 federal USBG dollars. This is going to be for a resurfacing project which, for sections of Kirby Road and South Russell Street. And that will be, that's an existing project, so you don't see NEPA design in this one. It's an existing project, so to speak, construction. They were previously obligating it off their grouping page, but they requested to have it split off for more visibility. Next we have is the Portland Urban Area 3R Improvement Program. That's Amendment 23. This is to reflect 2 things. A, we're showing the additional allocations that we did not have reflected from TDOT's Small Cities Balance. And then we're also showing the funds that are being shifted to the Kirby Road and South Russell Street resurfacing. So essentially that's, and it looks like it's, even though we're moving a little over $500,000 of federal funds to Kirby Road and South Russell Street, the actual decrease is only roughly, on this page, is roughly about $50,000 total. So that incorporates about $500,000 of funds that have been included in the TDOT small city balance that we're just adding to the tip. So it's a little, if you look at it, that's why it's only decreasing by that amount. And we're also adding a project from that page. Next, we have another new project. This is the freight vehicle charging infrastructure along Interstate 24 and 65 corridors, named Future TN. This is from TDEC. This is a charging, fueling, and infrastructure grant they received. This will establish 2 publicly accessible zero-emission vehicle infrastructure hubs in Nashville. These are primarily going to be for medium and heavy-duty vehicles, and these will be along I-24 and I-65. There's a total of about $35 million of federal for a total project cost of $48 million, split between fiscal year 25 and 26. Next, we have a Brentwood Signal System Upgrades Amendment. This is Amendment number 25. This one's adding a little over $700,000 of federal CMAQ funds. This is essentially bringing up the tip page to reflect the most recent construction costs. There's also some minor changes to the, you see the 80/20 CMAQ line to reflect the most accurate estimate for ADA work for the project. So this is basically getting them ready to go to the construction phase as they finalize those numbers for the local programs office. Next, we have for amendment number 26, we have the National MTA Administration Building Rehabilitation at the Nestor Building. This is adding funds. This is adding just under 1.5 million of previously unprogrammed FTA 5339 funds. These are bus and bus facility funds to the project. Is requested by the National MTA. That will be for fiscal year 25 implementation. Our next page is another new page. This will be a new groupings page that we're going to create. This is the same funds that we're adding to the previous page for MTA, these 5339. These are basically capturing all of our funds that we had essentially in our financial tables that were not programmed. We're adding a grouping so it's a little bit more visible, and we can chip those funds more clearly in the future between any other projects would need those 5339, those bus and bus facilities grants. We are adding a little over $800,000 of federal 5339 funds, and that's split between the National Urbanized Area and the Murfreesboro Urbanized Area, with about $700,000 for the National Urbanized Area and a little bit under $150,000 for the Murfreesboro area. And those are both be for fiscal year 26 implementation. Next, we have the Raymondhurst Parkway at US 31, State Route 258 at US 31 West, pedestrian safety improvements in the city of White House. Again, they're adding just under $17,000 of local funds to the project. This is just to bring up the project to estimated total project cost needed to be able to request funds for the construction phase. Next, we have another two projects that are kind of linked together. This is our Regional Active Transportation Program for Amendment 29. We are shifting just under $25,000 of federal UTAP funds for fiscal year 25 to the next project, and which is the Mount Juliet project. So this is only reducing this project by a little over total project cost of $30,000, but $24,000 that is the UTAP is being shifted to the next project. And the last one in our packet, this is the Lebanon Road Sidewalks Phase 2 of Mount Juliet. We are adding just under $25,000 of federal UTAP funds to a NEPA design and construction line in the TIP. This project previously had federal funds obligated in the previous TIP cycle, so it is eligible to use those funds or has basically the infrastructure in place with local programs as in a NEPA document, other phases, to be able to use those funds. That's all the TIP amendments, Chair. Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Taylor. Questions from the board?
I wanted to say, I really like the way that y'all reformatted these tip sheets. I think they're much easier to understand now. They look really good.
I'll take credit for that, but it was actually Michael who spearheaded that. I love it.
Any other questions from the board? Well, you'll notice the agenda identifies that each of the first three items has a public hearing. So I do want to open the public hearing for the purpose of receiving comments pertaining to the proposed action. Requesting public hearing. Seeing none, entertain a motion to adopt resolution TPB 2025-07, amending the Transportation Improvement Program.
So moved. Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Thank you, Taylor. That is adopted. Moving on to items 3B and 3C. These are adopting performance-based planning targets for infrastructure condition and system performance. I want to introduce Daniel McDonald, GNRC Director of Transportation and Infrastructure, to present background information and staff recommendation for items 3B and 3C.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So we have two recommendations to adopt performance measures. Performance-based planning has been required of MPOs in the state since MAP 21. This is an effort to create specific targets to assess the performance of our transportation system and align with national goals. So we have 5 federally required performance measures that we adopt as a region on various cycles that aim to improve our transportation investments. State DOTs and MPOs are required to assess the performance of the transportation system and set statewide or regional targets for improvement and demonstrate how investments are used to work toward these goals. So, and then a note that if the targets are not met, the state may not flex certain federal grant funds away from their intended purpose. So the table you see here lists the 5 performance targets that we adopt. If you remember in January, we adopted our annual roadway safety PM1 targets that are different than the statewide performance measure. We choose to set regional targets for roadway safety to better reflect our regional priorities. But for the next two targets that we're recommending supporting today, pavement and bridge infrastructure condition and the highway system travel time reliability, we are recommending adoption of the statewide targets. The other two required performance measures, transit asset management and public transportation safety, are updated as needed, and we have endorsed regional targets on those. As noted, we are currently undertaking the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan update, and this plan will continue to guide us in the future on the decision to support statewide targets versus establishing our own regional targets for any of these performance measures. So for performance measure 2, infrastructure condition, the state establishes targets based on data collected on the percentage of interstate pavement in good or poor condition, the percentage of national highway system pavement in good or poor condition, and the percentage of national highway system bridge deck areas in good or poor condition. So you can see here a map of the network of roadways in the state, which are assessed for pavement condition by TDOT. And here's a snapshot of those pavement conditions being assessed with the zoom into the Nashville area, the red being poor and yellow being fair condition. Similarly, the NHS system bridge inventory is also collected and assessed by TDOT with all those bridge locations shown on the map throughout the state, and a snapshot of the annual bridge condition with a zoom into our region for that assessment. So this chart shows the statewide targets for performance measure 2 infrastructure condition that TDOT has adopted and we are recommending supporting today. These targets are unchanged from the baseline assessment year. So if you look at the baseline column, you see that percentage of interstate pavement in good condition is about 71%. The 2 and 4 year targets of 58% show the next two columns show that we want to ensure that they do not fall below 58% on these horizons. And then if you go to the next line down, conversely, the percentage of interstate pavement in poor condition is 0.2%. And we want to show that we're not moving above 1% in the 2 and 4 year horizons there, as an example. So for the non-interstate pavement on the national highway system, this is like US Highway 31, State Route 6, for example. Good condition is 40.3% as a baseline year, and we want to show it maintaining at or above 36% for the 2 and 4 year targets. The bridge deck areas are shown at 32.5% and are targeted not to fall below 32% for these horizons. These numbers reflect the same performance measure targets that were adopted by the TPB in May of 2023. So the second target that staff is recommending you to support today is performance measure 3, system performance, which focuses on travel time reliability on the interstate, the non-interstate, and the HS system, and freight truck travel time reliability. For each of these metrics, there are required measures in the code which formulate reliability on and off the interstate states by measuring 15-minute periods on corridor segments and comparing 80th and 50th percentile travel times in the intervals to develop the concept of reliability. These maps show a snapshot of that reliability as calculated by the state. So similarly to the road condition chart, this chart shows the statewide targets for reliability that staff is recommending support of. The baseline column is at about 92% reliable on interstates and 93% reliable on non-interstate NHS routes. The 2 and 4 year targets show us not dropping below 88.4% and 89.4% respectively. Freight truck time reliability uses a slightly different index where lower numbers represent more reliable times. For the baseline year, we were at 1.32, and the state is recommending targets not above 1.35. Again, these numbers reflect the same performance measure targets that were adopted by TPB in May of 23. We'll come back to the reliability performance measures, but at this time, we're recommending adoption of resolution TPB 2025-08 to support performance-based planning targets for pavement and bridge conditions. I'll turn it back over to Chair O'Connell for questions and action.
All right, well, you've heard presentation from staff on both items 3B and 3C. I would open the floor for any questions on either item.
Daniel, could you go back to the bridge condition table that you put up on the screen? I just wanted to verify that what's shown in the resolution is what's on the screen there, because I know the first number is 70.8, but I think it's a subset of the
They're
table.
reordered, I think,
Yeah.
is the,
Well, I don't see a 90 or a 70.8. Oh, there, okay, so just wanted to make sure. I was a little confused.
I saw the same thing flipping through it. The, what's on the screen and what's in the table are ultimately the same, just in a different order.
Thanks for doing that.
Any other questions? Mayor?
Thank you, Chair. I want to ask the cycle of assessment. So for the roadways and paving condition, like what cadence is that on? I presume it's somewhat perpetual, but can you kind of just speak to the timing of that on the assessment cycle?
Might turn that back over to TDOT to, sorry.
I will invite the TDOT representative to comment.
Okay, well, I believe that if you're saying like, how often are these
Yeah, What
reassessed?
is the cycle of evaluation? How
Well-
is it evaluated? And
How are they evaluated? Oh, well, I mean, that, we have a whole system that I guess I wasn't prepared to talk about how they're evaluated, but there's criteria that determines the, you know, the level of payment. We have sophisticated equipment that goes out and measures the density of the pavement, the cracks, and determines what's in good, fair, and poor condition. The cycle of that is every year. We go out and assess that every year. The cycle for the performance measures is every 4 years, and there's the 2-year interim plus the final year of that cycle. Right now, the cycle is 22 to 25. So we'll be, I think, reassessing that. I guess it depends on what the new Infrastructure Act might provide us, if that is adopted at any time. But if there's a continuing resolution, I would assume that we'd have to find a new cycle, a new 4-year cycle potentially. I don't quite know all of the answers to that, unfortunately. I'm sorry.
may I ask a follow-up question, Chair? So then every lane mile is assessed every year? Like,
For the payment condition?
yeah, for pavement condition?
I believe so. Yeah,
Okay.
that's performed by the asset management group. I
Okay,
don't know, Stacy, if you have, I mean, we are going through a current RFP to acquire the recompete for the contractor that does the assessments, but I thought it was every year.
okay. And then just last question, if I may. So if the baseline is this 0.2% in poor condition, and we're saying that we don't want that to go past 1% in poor condition, what is the current status today? Is the baseline 0.2%? Like, what is the current poor percentage today?
I think it's 0.2%. I mean, I don't know. I'm sorry that I don't have that answer.
Does the GNRC know what the current poor condition? I mean, is the baseline in fact the status as of today, or the assessment as of
Mr.
today?
Chair, and I'm noticing on the screen, it's 2020X. I think there was some question on our staff, Matt, about what the baseline or base year data is being represented. Is that 2022?
Yeah, I'd say it is, because that's the cycle that was identified in all of the
And I think
language in
the
here.
true value of 2020, the present condition today is probably somewhere in between that number and their target is probably somewhere. We can follow up with TDOT staff to get you the number.
I'm sorry.
We'll also look to see if there are interactive maps for the pavement conditions and bridge conditions, because that could be useful in your local planning. And then we'll also talk with TDOT about whether or not you will accommodate any locally collected data that also describes conditions on the overlapping network. Because I know many communities also have a pavement management system that might be done more frequently than what the state is doing.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Just to add something to that, the bridge data is also, that's in 2-year cycles. So the bridges are inspected on 2-year cycles. That's federally mandated. And that's any bridge over 20 feet. So that includes local bridges as well. So just for anybody that wasn't aware of that, it's 20 feet. And those are available on TDOT's website, those reports.
Mr. Chair, the other thing I'll just underscore here, Daniel mentioned it earlier, is that as we're updating the regional transportation plan, some of our policy discussions should center on the extent to which we want to establish our own regional targets for these two performance measures as well. Again, just to put everybody at ease, the penalty for not meeting your targets, which ought to be goal-oriented, it should be things that you're trying to achieve that are an improvement over your current conditions, that the penalty is simply not being able to move money that the federal government is giving you for the intended purpose of maintenance in this particular case, which doesn't seem to be much of a penalty at all if you're not meeting your goals with respect to maintenance.
Because you would want to reinvest it.
That's right.
All right. Madam Vice Mayor, that got you?
That's everything. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Any other questions for staff? All right, I'm going to try this because we've had staff report on both items. I'm going to open a public hearing for both items. So for the purpose of receiving comments from the public pertaining to either of action items 3B and 3C, anyone wishing to address the board? All right, seeing no requests for public comment during public hearing on both items, I would entertain a motion to adopt both resolution TPB 2025-08 and 2025-09. All right, got a motion
Second.
and a second. Any discussion on these two action items? All right, seeing no request for further discussion, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? All right, those resolutions are approved. Moving on, we've got action item 3D. This is the draft policy framework for the regional transportation plan, and I will invite Michael Skipper, our executive director, to present the draft policy framework for the major update to the regional transportation plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have on the slide just a placeholder for the handout that I really want to draw your attention to that's within the packet. This is a action that we're requesting from the board simply to document your buy-in to the goals and objectives that we would like to build the plan around in terms of our long-term, the things that we're trying to achieve over the long term with our investments that will be identified through the transportation plan. So I'll walk you through that handout, but I'll keep the slide up top. I'll come back to the reason why I have those outlined in orange on the screen. But looking at the handout, this is a document that you've seen before. This is actually similar formatting and similar content that you've seen through the last two plan update cycles. This was an opportunity for participating jurisdictions, cities, counties, transit agencies, and TDOT to weigh in on the goals and objectives that are contained within the current transportation plan, to provide feedback to us through a survey and through conversations that we've had with each of the groups over the last several months. But today I'm bringing to you the results of that feedback and staff's recommended changes to the policy framework, which will shape the major update to the regional transportation plan. And then by extension, any of the updates to the transportation improvement program that we do that are a nested part of our RTP itself. Looking at the handout, I'll walk you through the contents very briefly and then dwell a little bit longer on the suggested changes that we have for you as a result of the feedback that we've received from you. So we start with information about the call for projects. As you all know, and Matthew will talk about in a minute, we've been engaging with you and your staff on the projects that you would like to see move forward between 2026 and 2050. I know many of you ideally would like to see your projects move forward in the first part of that long range horizon, but nonetheless, we are engaged in a process to identify those projects, those cost estimates, the scopes of work, and the eligibilities for that project for federal funding that will flow through the NPO's RTP and Transportation Improvement Program. Then we get into the next few sections, which describe for you, hopefully in plain language, the decision-making authority of this board, which simply put is to document local buy-in to all decisions that are being made about the use of federal transportation dollars within our region, regardless of who's implementing the project or who ultimately has like upstream programming authority. Federal law does require that you, at the very least, concur with every single dollar that's invested in our region from federal transportation funds, whether it be formula funding that you routinely work with through the TIP amendment process or discretionary grants. The other shared responsibilities that you have are just to work cooperatively across political jurisdictions. The reason why NPOs exist is to make sure that we're pulling together the local elected officials and their staff from the participating jurisdictions and the implementing agencies to make sure we're on the same page with respect to defining our vision for using federal funds within our area. Federal government since the 60s has recognized that their approach to improving the roadway and transit systems should not be bound by political jurisdictional boundaries, but instead commuter sheds and traffic patterns. So we have a larger, in the case of our NPO, seven county footprint within which everybody needs to get on the same page as to how we intend to use federal transportation dollars. And just be part of the process to brainstorm creative solutions to improve the transportation system that go beyond getting people from point A to point B as quickly as possible. There are other community goals that you have, other goals the state and the federal government have with our transportation dollars, which leads me into the last section on the first page of this handout, which is the associated issues and concerns that we want to make sure we're addressing through the regional transportation plan. The federal legislation that's been passed over the last couple of decades have increasingly brought into the scope of work for NPOs and state DOTs additional issues beyond transportation, those issues that are impacted by the transportation decisions. And so you see here what rose to the top of the list for our local partners. Some of the revisions here that I'll point out, yellow indicates text changes from something that previously existed, and the green is an indication of something that we've added to the policy framework. I won't walk you through every single one of these, but give you a couple of examples. Like, so for the first bullet here, this used to say the rapid pace of change. The feedback here was just to be a little bit more specific as to what we were talking about. So we changed that to the rapid pace of growth and development. As far as affordability, we've made now a decoupling of housing affordability and the broader issues with respect to cost of living. So we've kind of separated those out in that one bullet. And then we've also added, I'll highlight the addition of the growing concern around the increased risk from flooding and extreme weather events, and just wanting to make sure that our transportation plan promotes resiliency in the way that we locate infrastructure and then design and engineer that infrastructure to withstand potential threats moving forward. That's the first page. This is very much informational in nature. The second page will get into the more operational aspects of the policy framework, which will shape the decision-making that we do in terms of the project prioritization that will come out of our process. So I'll highlight the guiding principles and then the goals and objectives. Again, this is in large part representative of the principles, goals, and objectives that we've had in the transportation plan for the last 10, 15 years. But this was an opportunity for you all to either reaffirm or make suggested revisions. There was some tweaks to the diversity principle just to make sure we weren't running afoul with the prohibition on certain words coming out of the federal government, but our commitment to addressing vulnerable populations and just making sure that we respect the diversity of the communities that we serve, that commitment isn't wavered. But it's always been the case that the diversity principle here was broader than that. It's always been about making sure that our investment strategy was diverse, that we weren't putting all of our eggs in one basket with respect to improving the transportation system. Like we just weren't building roads everywhere, for example, that we had a really solid menu of choices to work from in terms of investing in the transportation system. And then it's also just a reflection of just sitting around this table. We've got probably 20 or so communities, all different shapes and sizes, different community character. And it's really important that with our federal funds that we honor and respect the local context for the work that we're doing. Then moving on into goals and objectives, again, these 6 goals are largely, well, there's reaffirmed through the feedback that we got. There were some tweaks to language around the objectives. Most notably was a suggestion that we put more emphasis on encouraging and incentivizing TDOT, transit agencies, and local governments to make projects as shovel-ready as possible. As there are discretionary grant opportunities available or August redistributions from federal highway, the more you have a project ready to be topped off for implementation, the more competitive it's going to be to draw down those funds. So that's part of it. But the other part of it is, I think historically, we've had challenges fully like thinking all the way through some of the concepts that we want to promote across Middle Tennessee because we lack the confidence that the resources will be there to implement the project. So the other part of this is encouraging people to do the front end investment in planning and community outreach and design and engineering to get your project fully defined. Makes it easier for funding partners and the community to buy into that when you've got the vision laid out in a clear way. So investing in those activities that get you to that point is something that we want to encourage through the objectives of the plan as well. So that is a presentation of the policy framework. Again, this is we're volunteering to ask you for action. It's just a doc. We're going to be getting into project evaluation, project scoring, and then ultimately project prioritization. And we have a merit-based project process that is shaped by these goals and objectives. So it's just important to make sure that we're all on the same page as to what those are early in the process. Doesn't mean we can't add objectives, we can't tweak the goals moving forward, but since they are the basis of our project evaluations, we wanted to get that documented support at this part of the process. I do have a few slides that will remind you and set up a conversation that we'll have with each of you individually at the county level, in groups at the county level, as it relates to the methodology that we use for project evaluation and scoring. But let me pause here, see if there's any questions or comments about the draft policy framework.
Thank you, Michael. Questions from the board for Michael or staff? All right, seeing none. This is an action item. Staff have requested our support as a board for endorsement of this draft policy framework to document local support for regional goals and objectives. I would accept a motion to endorse. Got a motion and a second, sounds like. All right. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstention? All right. Mr. Skipper, you have endorsement from this board for that draft framework.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And then I'll just go through these next few slides just as a tease for what we'll be talking about with you all in July at the county level. So we've got the 6 goals that are identified in the policy framework. And you can see here in terms of sort of the math behind how we score projects, you can see the weights associated with each of these goals. It's been the case for the last couple of cycles that roadway safety has been the most important goal from a weighting standpoint. And so projects, all things being equal between 2 projects, the one that is improving roadway safety more than the other is more likely to be ranked higher on a project list, for example, right? And it's a lot more complicated than just rank ordering projects because projects are all, they're different for they're eligible for different grant programs. And so ultimately you're trying to, we will have an overall list of project rankings, but it's important to be able to filter that list according to the revenue streams that are coming into the region. So the ultimate rankings may change depending on the grant program that we're looking at. But you can see there the relative weights for each of the goal areas to give you a sense of how we score projects. We look at a lot of information. I'm going to skip ahead to this slide. We look at information from 3 sources, application submissions. So the information that you're giving us about the project, namely the problems you're trying to address, any evidence you have those problems existing and how your project will help achieve create a solution for those problems. That's part of it. The design of your project. So if you're doing a roadway widening project, you're going to get additional points if it's also providing a multimodal accommodation. This context sensitive, where it's not just sidewalks everywhere. If that's not the most appropriate multimodal solution for that particular project, but we are looking at the specific elements that you're proposing as part of the project. So that goes into the scoring criteria. This middle column, we're looking at the conditions and what we call trends indicators. This is where we're looking at the context for your project. So all things being equal, if we've got two projects and one of them is a highly congested corridor and the other is not, the one that's in the highly congested corridor is going to score better than the one that's not. So those are the conditions that we're looking at in terms of what's happening on the roadways now, what's projected to be happening on the roadways in the future. What is the population and employment situation around that corridor today and in the future? What are the environmental concerns today and in the future with respect to the context for that project? So we're looking at that. And then finally, we do a staff qualitative assessment, which is where we try to make a determination of, all right, so if you say you're trying to achieve this objective, how well is that scope aligned to being able to achieve that? And then has the project scoped in strategies to mitigate any concerns that might have been indicated as part of the conditions and trends indicators? And so a lot of the staff qualitative assessments, while some of it goes into the scoring process, most of it is just feedback for you to help improve the projects, either their competitiveness for our process or discretionary grants, or just to improve the scope of the project and better position you for project delivery. I'm just pointing out some things that you need to be aware of as you get further along into thinking about project implementation. So that's a look at the source of information that we use in the project evaluation process and ultimately the rankings. We'll go into the weeds on this when we come out to meet with the individual jurisdictions. I keep saying individual, but everybody within a county will get together around the table with us and talk through projects, where they are in terms of our evaluation, and then just make sure we're answering all the questions that you might have about our methodology. Again, this is a very merit-based process. It's based on data and information. And then ultimately, though, Transportation Policy Board does have a political interest to make sure that we're also being mindful of, things beyond the matrix. So that is the rest of the information associated with this agenda item. Chair.
That takes us through item 3D. So that is all of the action items on today's agenda. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Question on that. If there were applications submitted that didn't touch on some of the criteria, when you come out to do the individual discussions, will additional information be eligible to be submitted if it would provide details for some of those key criteria?
Yes, ma'am. Right now, there's still time now, but also that the point of, and Matthew will talk about this in a minute, we have 3 rounds of workshops. The focus of that second round is just to make sure that you have that opportunity, that if there are things that you can propose to make your project stronger, that you have the opportunity to do that before we finalize the evaluations. We are interested in incentivizing improvements to projects as a result of the process itself, right?
When we talk about economic impact and how that's quantified, is there consistency across all projects submitted for how that is looked at, or is that based on simply the numbers submitted by the individual jurisdictions?
Both of those things are true. So there is a base analysis that we do that is looking at the project relative to the placement of jobs within the corridor today, and then we have that projected forward, which is based on your local land use policies and economic development plans that we're aware of. And so there will be consistency in that part of it, which is that we're looking at the project relative to where jobs are today and in the future. But we do allow locals to submit additional documentation that ties that project to an economic development objective that may not bear out in the data that we're looking at. And then that can weigh in as well in terms of the ultimate score for economic development, for example.
Thank you.
I see another hand back there.
The 6 criteria that you had for the scoring, are those set? Are we going to be able to comment on those at any point?
Yeah. So those are viewable now in terms of what was included in the methodology for the 2045 process. We'll see comment before we begin the process. We've got some time to spend just doing the qualitative assessment. In terms of the quantitative stuff, we've got time to work with those that are interested in that.
One suggestion to plant the seed today would be to include some type of project readiness score scheduling. That seems to be something that's definitely moving our projects. So unless it's covered in there, but I didn't see
it. Is, but it's that's what it's a little bit squishy of a metric. So like if it's in if it's in an adopted program, if it's in the TIP, if it's in the 10-year plan, if it's in one of your local CIPs or CIBs, it's easy to say there's a commitment there.
Right.
But I think there's more we can do to capture that information.
Other comments, questions? Yes.
For the county meetings, are those publicized online or we'll reach out to each jurisdiction to invite people to those?
I do believe we put them on the calendar, but it'll be a lot of outreach to the local partners to find the right date, find the right location, and make sure that the invitations are going out as broadly as possible. I'll ask Matthew, just put you on notice to kind of talk a little bit about how we schedule the first round and how we may do something similar or different for the second round.
Sure. Thank you.
Discussion, yes.
Just one other comment from the perspective of a very small jurisdiction, because I think Nolensville is smaller compared to, well, a lot of you all. When there's priority given to projects that are funded in capital improvement programs, that's very difficult for a jurisdiction like Nolensville because of the relative size of our budget. I mean, we're similar in size to Fairview in terms of our annual budget. And if there's not the ability for smaller jurisdictions to move up in the plan because we don't have $10 million set aside, which is more than we spend over a 5-year period for transportation, that becomes very difficult for us to feel like we're able to move through the process at all. And so, any advice or suggestions or how smaller communities like us are able to move in this process is very helpful. And potentially, if there's consideration given to smaller jurisdictions that would have different budget sizes. I mean, we're talking about an annual operating budget of $8 million in Nolensville as compared to quite a bit more in other areas. So just one item for consideration.
That's very much noted. One thing that this won't address every ounce of concern that you have about this particular issue and the disadvantage that smaller communities might have along these lines. But in the way we score projects, no one single variable would ever be the reason why you do or don't get included in as a top priority. And it's sort of the best way to think of it is, say you have 2 projects that otherwise are scoring the same, but one of them is budgeted and one of them is not. And the one that's budgeted from our perspective would be the higher priority. So that's the way to look at that. And then the other thing I would say to that is a lot of the work that we're talking about here is kind of part of the bureaucracy of getting access to federal funds. But the other value of this Transportation Policy Board and you as individuals is the work that you're doing together to promote greater opportunity for local governments to generate revenue to pay for capital investments in their communities. And so that's the other part of this that's continuously happening alongside the planning process.
All right, other comments, questions on item 3D? Seeing none, that takes us to informational items. Item 4A includes regional transportation plan updates, and I will invite Michael to share with members of this board additional information on ongoing activities related to the major update of the RTP.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and just consider this like a continuation of the conversation we're just having. Really appreciate those questions. Those are really good questions. And we encourage you to ask every single question that you have. You should go through the process. The number one measure of success for us as a GNRC staff is that everybody feels like the process was fair and equitable. If at any time you ever feel like you're not sure what's going on or that might not be the case, please speak up, either in this room or individually. So for today's update, we've got three things that we want to talk with you about. One is just to remind you of round 2's county level workshops that are coming up. Matthew will also do maybe a brief recap of how the first round went. And then he'll present the current list of candidate projects and tell you why that list that you have in front of you is really important to be looking at. And then he'll toss it back to me and I'll walk you through where we are with the financial planning assumptions for the RTP. And then we'll think that'll what we have on that for today. I do, before I hand it over to Matthew, just, you'll see this slide as we go through the process, but this is just tracking our progress through each of the steps that we outlined in terms of the sequence of activities for plan adoption. This month, we're focused on the policy framework. We just discussed that and the financial assumptions. And then in June and July is when we'll be engaged with you either at one of these meetings or in your county about the needs assessment that we're doing, the initial project evaluations, and what you can do to make your projects a higher priority on the list.
All right, thank you, members of the Transportation Policy Board. To mirrors Michael's comment, I'll say I appreciate all your comments and questions so far. These are helpful for us. I'll be talking here first about the county level workshops. This is a kind of a more detailed view of some of that schedule that Michael just showed. The update now is we have completed our round 1 county level workshops. So to the point of kind of what is included there. So we have in April, reached out to all of the member jurisdictions, especially through the staff of the TCC. We scheduled workshops in all of the 7 counties in the MPO area. Those included county level representatives, municipal representatives at the city level, transit agencies at the city in the county as well that serve the county, and representatives from TDOT at those. Those were scheduled over a 2 to 3 week period in April with initial contact to TCC staff by email, but then some after the TCC meeting, we just had a list of times and dates available and people could confirm which worked for most of them. We'll probably do a similar process in July. We haven't set the specific dates for those meetings, but I expect you'll be hearing about that, or at least staff on your in your jurisdiction will be hearing about that in the upcoming weeks. The round 1 meetings, like I said, those are complete. Those are mostly a data collection and data verification process. So that RTP, that 25-year lookout of candidate projects, we are collecting those projects, making sure that we understand those projects, the scope, kind of any previous process that has happened on that project, and really importantly, making sure that we verify our understanding of where that project is, the spatial information. Part of our evaluation process puts those projects on a map and ranks them against certain criteria. So it's just verifying that we understand that project in a deep way. I will say, and there'll be some information on the screen shortly about the number of projects, and you'll have a printout in your packet here as well. We are really wrapping up the data verification process now, moving into round 2, that evaluation process. We believe we have almost all of the projects from candidate communities, but do know there are a couple that are still submitting. I would just ask if anyone is still submitting projects, please work to submit those at the earliest convenience, just so we can adequately score those in the evaluation process in June and July. Looking forward to the later 2 rounds, these hints to some of the things Michael was talking about before. But round 2 is the beginning of talking about our evaluations for these projects, that part of that prioritization process. So as you likely know, this is a cost constraint plan. We do show illustrative needs beyond that cost constraint, but simply not every project makes that cost constraint list. In July, we'll go back to your staff in your community, talk about how the evaluations are going so far. Ask any questions, make sure we completely understood the project. There are a lot of them, but also as we were talking about, if there are things that staff flagged as we weren't sure if this safety element was considered or something like that, any element of the scope that may improve the outcomes on that project, we will discuss that with staff at the round 2 meeting, and that is a chance to make tweaks for the final evaluation. Fairly soon after that, round 3 will be kind of right back after that. We will have our final evaluation outcomes, and we will be reviewing that with your communities at that time, talking about kind of the way the fiscal constraint is looking at that date. That said, that moves us to our candidate project list. Again, you should have a printout in your packet, a large Excel document. So at a high level right now, we have just under 400 applications. I'll make some comments about the TDOT projects in a moment here, but you see the total ask is just under 15 billion. We do have TDOT's 10-year plan projects here now. They have been submitted by TDOT. That was not true at an earlier date if you heard any updates there. You'll see that about 6% of the applications are in the 10-year plan. And about 13% of that funding request is from TDOT's 10-year plan. I will comment, we do show currently what we're calling carryover projects from TDOT. That is long-range plan projects from the last RTP cycle that go beyond that 10-year plan horizon. We have in the past shown those as TDOT projects. There's been a request to not show TDOT as sponsor for things beyond the 10-year plan. We are still working on that notation, and we'll be talking with your communities about how to show that. But just as a note in your packet, the column furthest to the right, the TDOT 10-year column, it does show whether or not the project is included in TDOT's 10-year plan, specifically in the TDOT section of the packet, or whether it is one of those carryover projects. So like I said, we'll be following up with you to see which of those kind of carryover projects are important for your county long-term and how we want to show those in the packet. Otherwise, and I'll pause after the slide here. The applications by type, we have a high-level summary here. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the biggest category of type of project is on-road improvements. I will say that is a fairly large category. That scope just means changes to an existing roadway. Now that can be widening, that can be adding a sidewalk to the side. It can be a pretty large category of things. So I'm not surprising that's the largest category. There are, of course, some public transit and greenway projects there. The other is a small section, but this is usually going to be some sort of project grouping for maybe projects that are not big enough to stand alone on their own. So you may see like system-wide signal upgrades or something like that as a grouping in the other category. But that is a smaller portion of the applications by type. I'll comment, you do have your packet in front of you. There is also a link on the screen here if you want to have digital access to that as well. But do look over this, check with your staff if there are projects that you're expecting to see. We really need to get those ASAP. Otherwise, if you see typos or anything, we're definitely open to that feedback as well. And with that, and unless there are questions, I will hand it over to Michael. Oops, sorry.
It's okay. I just want to add a comment to what you're saying, Matthew, about how, we've asked you not to make TDOT the sponsor in some of those projects that go beyond the 10-year plan. I just want to say that it's the reason why we've said that is because we don't know what we're going to see in the 10 years beyond. So having projects that were included in a plan that are no longer in the 10-year plan could just complicate things in the future. I think for a needs perspective, we've got a lot of Improve Act projects that could be added into the plan, but cost estimates have not been updated since the 10-year plan. So we just don't, it's that uncertainty of where we want to put them. So I think as you all are working through your needs assessment and you determine where the deficiencies are, we could have the conversations about where those Improve Act projects might come into play and be placed into those particular horizon years beyond the 10-year plan. But I just wanted to reiterate that it's not a direct order to not say TDOT in sponsorship beyond 10 years. It's just that we can't answer those questions at this point.
But just to translate that a little bit more, so TDOT is committed to the projects in the 10-year plan. This is your opportunity to help them know what you want done after that. So whether it's listed as TDOT or not.
Sorry, lots of questions today. So specifically, what I'm hearing you say is that if there are the items, and they're all in like the 300s, kind of the one for Nolensville is Nolensville Road. We have separately submitted Nolensville Road as part of the application process, but I'm hearing you say that it will be removed from the list, or it will just.
It's just will not have TDOT as the sponsor.
And what's listed there will shift to Town of Nolensville as
the applicant sponsor.
And so what our citizens will hear, or at least I know they will at Nolensville. I'm most likely to get yelled at about traffic, probably the rest of you are as well. What they will hear is that TDOT is kind of removing that from their long range plan, or is there a separate long range plan that could be communicated as?
So we will, in other business that we had later in the agenda, I was going to mention that we are also in the process of updating our long range transportation plan, or 2055. It's a policy plan. It's not going to have specific projects identified in it, but it will establish the criteria for anything that comes through spin-off studies or corridor studies or anything that a region is doing that will help feed the hopper for future 10-year plan projects. That's the idea. So it's not that the projects are no longer needed. It is that the priority of the project has been pushed to beyond the 10 years of the current 10-year plan.
So it's just kind of shifting. We have the clear 10-year plan now. And so whereas it was all one big list previously, you're unhooking those. So there's longer range plans separately.
It would be great for this board and the region to determine the deficiencies that have been identified and which projects would be the best fit for those deficiencies. And then if they do happen to fall on a state route, that's where we have that conversation about, is there already something that's there that can help, that would give it a little more of a push towards, a future 10-year plan?
Well, I'd say that's what we do, right? So all we're doing differently is really a messaging thing, is that before, if it was a locally submitted project on a state route or an Improve Act project, we would just assume TDOT was going to be the sponsor, whether or not it was in their 3-year work program or not. And that's all they had up until recently. Now they have a 10-year horizon. So now they went from 3 to 10-year horizon. And so what we're doing is basically, we're just not going to say it's a TDOT project unless it's in the 10-year plan, but we're still going to say this is what we want TDOT to do next in our community. Right. So we'll work with you on the messaging in terms of what your residents are going to be hearing as to the commitment that the region has to that project and who will be implementing it. But the goal of this RTP is to position the projects that TDOT is not doing in our community now, make those the next in line projects for TDOT versus TDOT just showing up one day with a list of projects that they've decided to do in your community. That's a different list. We don't want there to be different lists. It's more of just a phasing issue than anything else. Clear as mud. All right. So I'll talk a little bit about the financial planning. Mary.
I didn't see the Amable Road interchange. Am I missing that on here? I didn't see it in TDOT's being listed as on their 10-year plan because I promise it's been added back to their 10-year plan.
Yeah, it should be. I mean, it's part of the 24, the choice lane.
Yeah.
Fall under 285, does it? I-24 congestion.
Hey, Bradley, you want to? Bradley Martin is here with the with Region Office to answer any of the 10-year plan projects. We're going into our other business stuff.
Before he does that, one thing I want to point out too, just the list is what was given to us. We haven't added the things that we think are missing. It's just a QC on what you think you've submitted, what TDOT has submitted to make sure what you think you submitted has actually been officially submitted.
Sorry, Mayor, you're talking about the list for the projects that are okay in that.
Okay.
Sorry, I thought
Yeah.
10-year plan.
Yeah. Okay,
And I can verify, I can follow up and make sure that.
and we can have a side conversation about that. So no problem.
I know we're getting a time. I'll be brief the next piece of information, but there's some good news here. There's some good news and there's some bad news. So maybe the bad news is Matthew just mentioned there currently are $14.8 billion worth of project requests. And we know that is falling short of the true need because there are some big projects that are not on the list yet, right? That are long-term projects that no one individual applicant has submitted, but that we will, as a region, identify that will significantly expand that number. The other thing about that number is it's intended to be present day value. Right, we've got to inflate those costs out over the next 25 years. So the actual total cost of projects will be significantly larger, probably 3 times that amount that you're seeing on the screen. The federal law, though, requires us to have a fiscally constrained plan. So we're going to forecast revenue streams, inflate project cost to year of expenditure, and then balance a budget. And that's where the project priorities come into play because the projects that rank higher on the list are more likely to be on that fiscally constrained list. The plan itself, though, will still bring attention to those projects that we don't think we can afford because the plan ought to be inspiring and motivating people to believe that we need more resources to improve transportation systems. So the fiscally constrained portion of the plan is important in terms of driving the programming at TDOT and checking the boxes with federal highway and federal transit. But the unfunded list in the plan is also important to communicate to residents and businesses and legislative bodies that we need more resources. I'm going to walk you through some of our fiscal assumptions for how we're going to estimate revenue and inflate costs. Just as a background, we had about we were receiving about $260 million a year from federal formula funds. That includes the state and local matching dollars that are required to draw down those funds. In 2021 is essentially, that was our base year number. And then we grew that number by 2% a year out to the year 2045, which is how we got to the $10.5 billion budget for the current plan that was adopted back in 2021. So $260 million a year, growing at 2% a year, got us to the $10.5 billion of revenue that we had available in the plan. For project costs, we inflated the cost of a project by 4% a year. And we plan in horizons, so we have a short-term horizon, a midterm horizon, a long-term horizon. In this plan, we will have a 2030, 2040, and 2050 horizon. For the 2030 horizon, which is the short-range component of the plan, we'll try to estimate costs. We have consultants under contract to do cost estimation on these projects, and we'll do the cost estimation up to the year of implementation for the first horizon. For projects that will fall within the mid and long-term horizon, we will assume that all the projects in that horizon will happen in the mid-year of that horizon, and then inflate those costs to that mid-year. So the 2040 horizon, if your project is in that horizon, we'll inflate that cost to the year 2035. It's just part of our assumptions. As far as what I'll talk a little bit in a minute about what inflation rates we likely are going to recommend. But first, let me put the $10.5 billion into context. So when we benchmarked our revenues per capita against the peer regions that we track ourselves against, we found that we were at the bottom of the list. This is a list of 15, 16 peers that we compared our regional transportation plan and the revenue assumptions against the companion plan for that respective MPO. And here are some key takeaways. We were being outspent in terms of revenue to expenditures by the Denver metro area, 6-1. Atlanta has 3-1 times the revenue that we do per capita, and then Austin 2-1 per capita in terms of the revenue and this expenditure identified in the fiscally constrained plan. When we analyzed the reason why we were so far behind in terms of level of spending, what we found is that typically the missing ingredient was local dedicated funding and then discretionary grants that were being pulled down as a result of the local dedicated funding. So a major thing has happened since we adopted the last plan, which is the passage of the Improve Act that created the local option for local communities to pursue dedicated funding for transit, and then the successful passage of the Choose How You Move initiative that Mayor O'Connell championed. So looking ahead to 2050, we're now seeing a regional transportation plan total budget that would be somewhere in the range of $14 billion to $20 billion over 25 years versus the 10.5. So about a 60% increase in the amount of money that we'll have available through the fiscally constrained plan. And that gets us basically halfway up that peer list. As a result of the passage of Choose How You Move. We're now middle of the pack and still instead of at the bottom of the list in terms of the amount of revenue we have for transportation. As we go through the financial planning part of the plan, we'll be looking to forecast federal formula funds, federal discretionary grants, state dedicated funds from fuel taxes, tires, and other resources that TDOT has available to them. We'll be working with you to identify local dedicated funding, any intention that you have to pursue that locally, and then also begin analyzing your general fund contributions to transportation. And then we'll do an assessment of the amount of revenue that we would generate through transit fares and then the choice lanes network as it's anticipated to be built out across the region over the next 25 years. Annual revenue growth, we haven't settled on a recommendation yet. This will be a little bit more complex than just a simple percentage because certain sources of revenue will grow at a different rate than another. But overall, we're looking at a 1.5% to 3% assumption for rate of growth year over year in terms of revenue. That gets us on the upper end when you bring Choose How You Move into the mix, about a $20 billion plan for the fiscally constrained portion. And then I'll end on the annual inflation adjustments that we're looking at. This is reflective, at least the short term is reflective of the inflation rates that TDOT is using in their programming. They have a declining a scale of 5.5% for this year down to 3.5% over the next couple of years in terms of annual inflation rates. But we're more likely to use something higher than that 3.5%, probably 4 to 6% for that mid and long-term horizons as we inflate costs. It does us no good to try to game this by showing a lower inflation rate than what we actually expect, because it just basically makes it seem like the money is there for you to do the project when it's not really. So we want to be as honest as possible in terms of the relationship between the revenue growth assumptions and the inflation rates that we're looking at. We've already began having conversations with your staff about the information that we'll need to collect from you all with respect to the local funding sources. We're building a tool now to collect this information from your staff. I just wanted you to be aware of the questions that we're going to be asking your staff at the local level to get a better picture of the local funds that you put into the transportation system that may be beyond the matching dollars that you have for the federal grants that you get out of the NPO process. And that is it for that update on the RTP. Happy to take any questions or move on with the agenda.
Question on RTP, Vice Mayor?
RTP question. As far as how this is categorized, and if that there's a lot of roadway widening, and if you look to the more detailed project name, you can see, oh, well, maybe it's sidewalks or, and so I'm wondering from a categorization standpoint, do you intend, or is there already a more kind of refined, so that we can go and say, okay, regionally, this is how much we're investing and these are our targets for, bikeways or sidewalks, and just looking at that relative to roadway widening and some of the other, right? Because optically, it looks like a lot of just roads and roadway widening, but I know when I shift left, oh, that's a sidewalk project. I know it's kind of both and, but I wonder how you're going to categorize that for a real kind of better granular understanding.
We probably have 3 times the number of categories than what's showing on the screen.
Spreadsheet, understood.
The projects fall in different categories. And so at the end of the day, we will be able to say that of all the roadway widening projects, 70% of them are bringing online new multimodal accommodations.
Okay. Right.
As an example.
That's my only question. Thank you.
All right. Seeing no other questions on the RTP updates, we will now move on to regular reports. I do not see Preston, so Matt, I think that
That's
makes
me.
you the TDOT representative.
That's right. Well, I guess the first thing, you notice that there is no federal highway on here anymore. And that's because our federal highway planning staff has decided to take the buyout. I think everybody knows that by now. So we are working with the remaining staff from federal highway to determine what our transition is and what assignments from the Sean, Melanie, and Zach are now being accomplished by other folks that stuck around. I know Sonia Baker and Jacinda Williams or Jacinda Russell are doing a lot of the heavy lifting for us at this point, but there will be some delays, I'm sure of it. So just be prepared. I think we are trying to do that, to do our best. As far as the state updates, since this is we're coming up on summer and blockbuster movie season is coming, I figured I'd just give you some coming attractions. We are in our long range transportation plan update cycle as well. We just received a notice to proceed a couple weeks ago for our consultant to start working on it. So I have mentioned this before, but we'll be coming to the board periodically to provide updates on our statewide plan and where we're headed with that and how it coordinates with yours. We also are going to be finalizing a statewide TDM plan shortly, sometime in July. And that is for those that aren't familiar with the TDM acronym in this state or this sense, it's the Transportation Demand Management. So it's about sharing rides and using multiple other modes of transportation that try to reduce congestion and improve air quality and try to provide a better quality of life for the entire state. So we'll be rolling that out at some point and would request to have that as one of the agenda items in future meetings. I have, Stacy Morrison over here and I have Bradley over here. Bradley's here, like I said, to answer any questions you might have on the 10-year plan. Stacy, I don't know if you have anything you had in particular?
No, just to note that, again, the projects we entered into the plan, I mean, again, like Michael noted, I mean, those are still drafts, so we are still working through all that, but I think we have a good plan to proceed on that.
Questions on TDOT report? We will move on to the Coordination Committee Chair's report. I will refer to Josh Sutta.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I'll be very brief. The county meetings were mentioned earlier by Michael. We had ours in Sumner County, so I can speak to that one specifically. I think they're very successful. It's something that we got 8 jurisdictions in Sumner County, and so getting everybody to coordinate. Sometimes you have projects that intersect at boundary lines and that kind of stuff. And so I think it's an immensely helpful process. We appreciate Michael and your staff doing that. And two, I mentioned it earlier, little stuff like forms and that kind of thing. I mean, I think it says a lot about their staff that they're doing the continuous improvement to look at better ways of doing things. So we appreciate you guys doing that too. And then I did want to say that I appreciate Michael introducing a new catchphrase that I'm going to use around the office, squishy metric. So I appreciate that, Michael, but that's all I had. Thank you.
Any questions for Coordination Committee Chair? Seeing none, we will move on to the Policy Board Chair's report. I think many of you will recall that the March meeting, Chair Callis solicited interest from members of this board and the Transportation Coordinating Committee to appoint a new programming committee, and I'll let Michael remind us of details there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The reminder here is that the programming committee is actually a recommendation from the Project Delivery Task Force that convened about 2 years ago under the leadership of Mayor Reed out of Smyrna to really explore reasons why we were seeing slow rates of obligation of federal funds and then subsequently project delivery getting held up along the way. And so it's a really good group of local government representatives, transit and TDOT, just brainstorming on the reasons, the obstacles that are in front of us in terms of project delivery. I came up with several recommendations. Here are the common obstacles. I'm not going to go through all this. This has been presented several times, but we evaluated the common obstacles to obligation and project delivery, found areas of opportunity to improve the process and our relationships and our planning work to better position us for efficient project delivery. Ultimately, that task force generated 2 groups of recommendations. The first group was a list of priority actions that were very delineated, recommendations or steps that could be taken in the short term. And then there was also a longer list of additional considerations for the partners around the table to consider for themselves to improve the project delivery process. I'll highlight the priority actions real quick because the establishment of a programming committee is one of those priority actions. But here's some good news. We've actually already gotten halfway through this list for implementing our priority actions. The first thing we did we did this before the task force wrapped up its work, but we hired a project delivery coordinator in the form of Taylor Lee, who you will see at these meetings. So that was a check. And then we developed a framework for project planning fund. We have money in the TIP right now that's available for local governments who need to do a detailed planning study to figure out what the obstacles are going to be for project delivery, namely around utility relocations, complex right-of-way situations. So we have money set aside to help you through that planning process before you get engaged in preliminary engineering, just so you know what you're in store for in terms of the obstacles that might get in the way of that project. So that's checked. And then today, the chair will name the initial appointments to this program review committee. I'll talk about its scope of work in a minute. 2 other things that were on that list that are already underway, the TIP programming policy. So as we update the regional transportation plan, at one of these meetings, we'll draw your attention to the policies that are in our transportation improvement program that govern the use of the funds that you're awarded in terms of and certain requirements that you have to produce proof of match to those funds, certain requirements on you to get that money obligated in a timely manner, or else risk those being pulled from the project. So there are a set of policies that we already have that need to be reviewed. And then it's ultimately those policies that this new programming committee is going to be enforcing on the group as we move forward. And then the other priority action was to consider the potential for project bundling and even regional administration of projects that are not being done by TDOT or maybe beyond the capacity of a local government to do themselves. And an example of where we have pursued that already is in our state Safe Streets for All application that was funded should say that was awarded. The contract is still pending, but that we received $6 million from USDOT directly, or in the process of receiving that money, to be able to deliver safety countermeasures across the region as the project implementer. And we'll be pioneering a couple of bundling strategies to streamline the contracting process for the delivery of those projects. As it relates to the programming committee, you'll notice that the purpose and the participant lists are identical to that of the project delivery task force. The difference is in the responsibility of this committee, which is to monitor the performance of funding obligations and project delivery, enforce the TIP policies, bring attention to emerging issues and concerns that are creating obstacles, and then to identify best practices to improve the speed and efficiency of delivering projects. This would be a standing committee that exists in perpetuity and would make recommendations back to the Transportation Policy Board, particularly related to the reprogramming of money that is stuck on projects that are not moving forward over to shovel-ready projects so that we can get those projects implemented. With that, I'll turn it back over to the chair for the announcement of the initial appointments.
Well, thank you, Michael. And if you are volunteering for this, I will certainly take credit as chair. If you feel like you're being voluntold, I will leave that at Mayor Callis's responsibility. But we do have 3 categories from the Transportation Policy Board. The position of chair or vice chair will be on the committee. Mayor Reed from Smyrna, Mayor Moore from Franklin. From the Transportation Coordinating Committee, again, position of chair or vice chair will sit Jim Kerr from Murfreesboro, Keith Reed from Hendersonville, and Micah Wood from Thompson Station, Mike Madison from Williamson County. From the transportation agencies, we will have a TDOT representative as well as a WEGO public transit representative. And Chair Callis indicated originally in announcing this that the composition of the committee would be discussed at their first meeting to identify any additional members who could strengthen the group's overall experience and qualifications. So that's where we are on the programming committee. Questions? All right. Michael, that brings us to your report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few announcements and reminders as we wrap up here. One is we are near the end of drafting the Unified Planning Board Program, which is a 2-year document that describes all the planning that we will be doing together, in part with the federal funds that we have to do planning, but also just to reflect the work that you're doing locally and that might be relevant. Where we are in that, really what's left is just to make sure that if you have planning happening within your community that's relevant to what we're doing through the NPO process, we want to make sure it's incorporated into the document, appropriately described. So Matthew and the team will be your point of contact for getting that information incorporated. We do plan to present the draft UPWP at the June TCC meeting and then have it ready for adoption at the July meeting of the Transportation Policy Board. It becomes effective it becomes effective October 1st, and then for the next 2 fiscal years at the federal level. Regional Transportation Plan tip updates, just a reminder, please review the list. Let us know what's missing, what needs to be corrected. Once we get to the end of May, we're really static in terms of that list, and we're just into the evaluation. And you can imagine the inequity that certain folks would feel if your projects end up popping up halfway through the month of July, right? So just please do yourself a solid and take a look at that list before June. And then finally, this is something we do each year. We receive a sub-allocation of Transportation Alternatives Program funds. This is funding to help improve multimodal accommodations across our roadway network. The money comes with a 4-year period for obligation and is subject to lapse after that. Each year we have to make sure that we're not leaving any money on the table for lapsing. We have $2.9 million of TAP funds available to be reprogrammed on projects that you might have with eligible activities that are experiencing cost increases, or if you have another funding source on that project to pay for eligible activities like bike ped accommodations that we can swap out. Now, we're doing a look at that opportunity. We'll reach out if that's an opportunity for your project. But if you're experiencing cost overruns on a multimodal project, reach out to, is Taylor going to be our point of contact for that, you think? Yes. Let Taylor know, and then we'll prepare a series of tip amendments for you at your next meeting to make sure that we don't lose any money for the region. I'm going to toss it over to Taylor real quick just to maybe hit the highlights of the tip status report that's in the packet.
This status report is kind of a big change from the last couple. It's kind of good news, bad news. You see here, unfortunately, the percentage of the tip period, 65%, and the percentage of fund obligated has kind of widened from about 3% to 7%. The good news is because we've added a lot of money in the last couple of months to the tip itself. So one of those is the North Thompson Lane resurfacing a TDOT project added over $100 million of SVG. So even though it looks like we're falling farther behind, technically we are, but it's because we have added a lot of money. So it's a good problem to have, essentially, that we're adding a lot of money to tip. TDOT has indicated that's supposed to be in the October letting. So that should be obligated before the tip period as well. So with something like that, we've had about $22 million of obligation last month. And that's kind of detailed by the funding source in there. So like I said, more high level, that's where I'm seeing this kind of gap is you're pretty consistently pretty close to that obligation and time period, mostly because we've added a good amount of money of federal funds in the last couple amendment cycles.
Taylor, upcoming meetings, GNRC.org/calendar. You can find all this information. Always good to double check locations. We do hop around a little bit. I'm going to end here. Anybody recognize based on screen? That's Max Baker, our Director of Research and Analytics. Would you believe that he has worked for you all for over the last 18 years of service to the MPO program? He left for a couple of years and went to AECOM before coming back to us when we began the process to integrate with GNRC. But Max Baker has been offered a role with the city of Franklin to be a multimodal coordinator to help them plot their course forward with in terms of the future of public transit and multimodal accommodations across the city, both in terms of improving local transit circulation, but also connections to the greater region. So this is his last week before he moves on to the city of Franklin. You'll likely still see him at these meetings. He will likely represent a good part of the city in conversations with us regionally. But we did want to acknowledge Max for his fantastic service over the last 18 years. I started at the MPO in 2007, and Max was my first hire. I was 30 years old at the time, had no idea what I was doing, but clearly made my first decision was a really good one. So this is Max. Throughout the years, I think that's his first headshot. And then you can see with Mayor Dean, that was the staff at the time when we adopted the 2035 plan. And then some casual photos up to more recent, just really good times working with him. Glad he's not going far, but encourage you to share your appreciation with him and his service to the region over the last 18 years.
Got Max. Okay, this brings us to other business. I will thank members for coming today, helping us get a quorum for important action items. Thank you to Michael and the staff at GNRC for the preparation. Before we adjourn, any additional business to come before the body?
Well, one slight note, I'm sorry if I had to mention it. I did look, I just showed Matt, the TMP, the traffic management plan. It's on TDOT's website. It goes in detail how often they do each roadway, how often they do it, and also the metrics they use. So we can get that to you to follow up.
Much appreciated.
Thank you. With that, I would take our final motion, which is one of adjournment. Okay, so we are adjourned. Thank you.
Keep your name tags on the table.
So he has a mustache, so it's like, oh, when it looks good. So I want to, so it's just like
Programming committee stuff.
Yeah, if you want to watch party, I'm like, hey.
I didn't intend to put you on the spot, Stan.
Basically, the other.
Yeah.
Especially, give us the.